Today we're working on a 2014 Jeep Patriot, and I'm going to show you how to replace the rear Swaybar bushings and Endlinks. Follow along. So, looking underneath the car from the rear, this is the driver's side rear control arm. This is the rear sway bar. This is what you would refer to as an end link for the sway bar. There's a bolt that goes through this and through the control arm. Got a bushing there and a nut that holds everything together. And the intermediate sleeve here that sets the spacing or the height of the bar. And then up here, this is the sway bar mounting bushing. And I know it's a little hard to see with the camera angle. I'm sorry for that, guys. But on the side of the bushing, you could see where it's actually starting to wear out. And it actually looks like some of the paint from the sway bar itself is starting to become damaged. When this happens, generally you get a squeaking sound. You'll notice it more like low speeds going over, for instance, a speed bump, where the suspension is really bouncing through its travel. And since it's mounted to the rear subframe, which is mounted to the chassis of the car, it resonates through the whole car. So you hear it as a really loud kind of sound. Over time, this bushing is actually going to wear out from the friction of moving back and forth in that bushing. Well, not back and forth. It's actually a twisting motion. So it's going to wear this out, and eventually it'll have a lot of play in this, and it'll turn into a clunk. You can also get a clunk from the end links. Sometimes what will happen over time is the bolt, especially through these sleeves here. Sometimes the sleeves are made of metal. This one's plastic, but what happens is water sits in them and it eats away at the bolt, and eventually the bolt will break. So when that sway bar is loose, besides handling issues, you can get a clunk or a clanking sound from that. So first things first is I'm going to remove the end links from both the driver's side and the passenger side. And once I have both of them off, I'm going to remove the sway bar mounting bushings. I'll probably do that one side at a time, just so something's holding the sway bar up into place. I don't want it falling down and have to fight with it. It'll be a little bit of a pain. So when I have the end links off, I'm only going to remove one mounting bushing, and that should make things a little easier. Okay guys, now that I have the end links off of both sides, now I have some play in the sway bar. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove the two 13mm bolts from the end link on the sway bar. And that should get the strap loose, and then I can ultimately get the bushing off. So I'm going to do that right now. All right, like I said, I'm going to leave the other side on to hold the sway bar up, because as you can see, the one come off, it drops down pretty low. I do want to make note of the two bolts here. So the shorter bolt was on the top, the longer bolt was on the bottom. So, I mean, the reasoning for this, I don't know. Just, make note of it so you can put it back the same way. Looking in the hole here, it looks like there's something behind it, so maybe that's why you can't use the longer bolt. So just be mindful of that. Short bolt goes on top, smaller bolt goes on bottom. But now that these bolts are loose, just take the strap off, and the bushing itself is split. So you just open the bushing up and remove the bushing. Now, when you have this off, you want to go ahead at this point and inspect the sway bar. Make sure the painted surface is nice and clean. There's no chips, there's no flakes, no heavy rust. If the painted coating is missing, it's not a big deal, but you do want to sand, wire brush, make this nice and clean. You want it to be as smooth as possible. You don't want all that rust scale on your new bushing, because it will destroy the bushing fairly quickly. So take sandpaper, emery cloth, something, and make this nice and smooth. When we go to install the new bushing, we are going to apply a silicone-based lubricant, which is specifically made for suspension parts like this, used on like urethane bushings, control arm mounting bushings, stuff like that, because it has good characteristics for suspension like this. So it'll allow it to move, but keep the noises down. So I just wanted to make note of that. Just make sure that's clean. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my new bushing and I'm going to get it ready to be installed. All right, guys, rear sway bar components. While I have them on the bench here, I'm going to prep them with a little of that silicone-based lubricant. Like I said, this stuff is like really thick, greasy, but basically I'm going to take some of this and I'm going to put it in all the areas where it's rubbing on the sway bar. You want this thing nice and lubricated. You don't want the rubber to be dry on the sway bar. It will make a lot of noise. It'll wear out the rubber really fast. You don't have to be heavy-handed with this, but just make sure you get a good amount of grease in. Since these are new, they are going to fit onto the bar really tight. So a little bit will squeeze out, but don't be alarmed at that. Same thing with the Endlinks. I'm going to put it on these areas here. This is what's going to contact both the sway bar and the lower control arm. So this area in particular is what's going to move. So I'll just get a little lubricant on all those. And once I have these all lubed up, we're going to install them onto the sway bar. The sway bar is nice and clean. I'm going to put the bushing on the sway bar. It's a little hard to get around it. I like to put it with the opening facing down. Maybe it's just a little pet peeve of mine. It doesn't really make a difference because when we tighten that clamp around, it's going to pull this pretty much tight. But my theory is if any dirt or water gets in there, it can just come out the bottom. The metal strap that goes around. And again, the small bolt goes on the top. So I'm going to try to get that one started first. And then the longer bolt to the bottom. Make sure the sway bar moves nice. And then, since I have this one on, I'm going to move to the driver's side now and do the same thing with the driver's side. And then finally, we'll get the Endlinks installed on both sides. Now that I have both sway bar mount bushings in, we can now install the Endlink. So we're going to install it the same way that we took it out. So the bolt is going to go through this way. The nut will go on a control arm. In between these two bushings, the sway bar will go. In between these two bushings will be the control arm. So you basically have to take this apart and put it together. Bushing, bushing, sleeve. There's the other bushing. This will go into the hole in the control arm. And then we could start the nut. Before I tighten this down, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the passenger side installed just the same way, and then we'll tighten both of them down. Okay, on the passenger side, same thing. I'm going to take this apart. Through the sway bar first, then into the sleeve, into the control arm, and then finally the lower bushing and nut. So from here we could tighten this thing up. Basically, there is no torque or maximum tightening amount you want to do to this. Basically, you just want to run this down snug until it just starts to crush down on the bushings themselves. You don't want them over tightened where they completely squeeze out, and you don't want them too loose where they're going to rattle. So basically, it's a judgment call. I'm going to run these down, just so I start to get some bulge, but nothing past that. So I'm going to tighten them down now, and then I'll give you guys a little bit of a close-up so you could see how far I went down with them. All right, as you can see, I got a little bit of a bulge here, a little squeeze out. There is still a little space here, but that's okay. You have to remember the suspension right now is completely sagged. Once the suspension comes out, it's going to straighten all this stuff up. But that's basically as much as you want to tighten this. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten the other side and then call this done. I hope you liked today's video on how to change the rear Swaybar bushings and Endlinks. As you can see, it was really easy to replace those. There's not a lot to it. I'd have to say the hardest part is probably like what I ran into, where the bolt that holds the end-link together rusts into the middle spacer. Like I said, you can either do like I did, use the ratchet to break the rust loose and pull the bolt through, or worst case scenario, you take a hacksaw or a sawzall and just cut the bolt to separate it and pull it apart. I mean, the kit comes with bushings, the bolt, everything, so you don't need to worry about trying to save everything there. But that's it. It's relatively straightforward. So, as always, guys, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you can, please share my videos. Give me a thumbs up. It really helps me. And drop me a comment below if you have any questions whatsoever. But that's it for today's video, guys. As always, thank you. See you next time. Bye, guys.